and we'll just, thank you, get going, and then we'll let people in as they are able to join us. I'm Amanda Wilson. I'm the Housing Initiative Director at COHHIO. I am joined by my amazing team, Ami Diallo and Evelyn Guerin. And we are so happy to also have Susanna Wayland here from ODE, and last but not least, our guest speaker today, Patrick Hickman. So we are doing a deep dive on attendance, and as it pertains to students experiencing homelessness. And we're, as usual, going to have a couple of breakouts where you can do some discussion and peer sharing and brainstorming. So I'm really excited for the presentation today. And with that, I will turn it over to Patrick.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Patrick Hickman, as I have been Ohio's attendance advisor, that was not my first foray into work at the Department of Education. Prior to this, I actually worked with Susanna in the homeless space, and then this opening happened, and they asked me to fill in for a bit, and then it just became my permanent job. So, but my roots are in homeless education. I've learned a ton from Susanna and working with districts about spending funds and how to help students who are experiencing housing insecurity. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and excited to get going. I do just want to start and say thank you, those of you who are working with Ohio's most vulnerable students. It's a lot of work, and it's heart-wrenching at times, and sometimes you feel like it's nothing you do can be enough, but you still come back every day, and you're here to learn more. And I think that's great, and that's what Ohio students need. So thank you. Just wanted to start off with that. We're going to go over just a little bit of vocabulary. I'm going to talk a little bit about positive conditions for learning. This might sound kind of weird because your role may not be in the school in a more traditional sense, like classroom teacher or administrator, but your role, you see what you see, and what you experience day to day with the students you work with makes it so that you are a valuable voice in the conversation about how schools build their culture and climate, so that these positive conditions for learning that work for building the school's culture and climate affect all students, even students who are experiencing homelessness. We'll talk a little bit about barriers, and then also communication. Throughout this, you'll have opportunities to speak in your breakout groups. I know Susanna is on the call on this meeting at any time. I've told her if there's something that I forget, she's going to pop on and stop me, and that is totally fine. So if you have a question also, I think I can pretty well follow the chat and what I'm doing at the same time. So I will just rest assured I will see your question, but I might wait a second to finish my sentence before I get to it. So there we go. So first of all, why are we talking about attendance data when you all are homeless liaisons or other adjacent roles? So first of all, we know that a student's attendance in their previous year is actually a better predictor for their attendance than test scores. And that is true through all of, like, especially through high school and into college. Attendance is an important piece of building habits and getting kids to come to school. And one of our jobs is to remove those barriers to help students come to school. We know that student interventions that schools spend a lot of money on and a lot of resources to do literacy intervention and math instruction and special ed intervention and all these things that we spend our time and resources on. that money will be for naught if the students aren't there, right? So this is why we talk about attendance. We know that students who are in the K to 2 band who are chronically absent, meaning they miss 10% or more of the school year, those students are 65% less likely to read on grade level to meet their 3rd grade reading guarantee. We know that students in high school who are chronically absent throughout high school are 89% less likely to graduate on time. They may still graduate, but they may miss a year because of missed credits over the course of that time. And also from an accountability standpoint, something that schools, why this has been one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons why chronic absence has been kind of raised in the public sphere is because this current school year that's ending is the first year that chronic absenteeism on the state report card is actually going to be a metric that schools will be held accountable to. So in the past, because of the pandemic, that was not the case. And this is the first year that's
Thank you.
so schools have looked at past chronic absence rates, but it hasn't affected them in the way that it will for this year. So wanted to give a little bit of context there and provide some data you can see. So this is some data that we put together for a report earlier this year, and just showing that the white bars are from pre-pandemic, and then the light blue bars are the first year of the pandemic when when the pandemic started. Yes. And then but that, oh, I'm sorry, no, I misspoke. Yes, the 1920 year is not represented here because that's when the pandemic started and things got very crazy in March in the state. And so how attendance got collected was kind of wild. So we have 18, 20, and 21. 21 being this last school year. And just to point out, what we know, of course, is that students who are experiencing homelessness in that 4th column are those are the students who are experiencing. So 65% of students who are experiencing homelessness or chronically absent. Again, that's missing 10% or more of the school year, which comes to about 18-ish days. Chronic absence is also for any reason. This is a part that is something I just want to clarify for folks, whether it sounds fair or not. Any reason means even if the school has special coding or they have a very good system for McKinney-Vento eligible students, they would be excused. They're supposed to be excused, right? But those excused hours still get lumped into chronic absence. It doesn't mean that students get in trouble for it or parents get in trouble for it. That's the chronic absence is just the measure that Ohio is using based on the Every Student Succeeds Act. That was the choice that they made for the choice that Ohio made for accountability. So, and the background on that, the very small background, is that all absence is important, even if it's something that we can't control, right? Whether it's unexcused, excused, medically excused, or in this case, a student is having housing issues. So, but these are also this just shows it in the context of other vulnerable populations, students with learning disabilities, economically disadvantages, our English learners, and students in foster care. So still the highest chronic absence rate that we see there is among students experiencing homelessness for reasons that you all know. So I mentioned we're going to talk about some positive conditions for learning, and where this comes from is from our great friends at Attendance Works. You can, where's my chat? I was going to put this in here so that you have it for later. attendanceworks.org. It's not a link though. Anyway, Google Attendance Works and you'll find it. They are our partners in the state. They are helping us a lot with statewide communications, guidance documents for schools, training for ESCs and SSTs throughout the state, helping us help schools combat chronic absence and try to shift away from punitive measures and punishing folks for not coming to school, and instead focusing on relationships and wrapping our arms around students who are experiencing certain barriers of all kinds to get to school. So in that vein, they have worked on what they call positive conditions for learning. And I share this first because I want you to see that they work within a tiered intervention pyramid, much like a lot of other tiered intervention pyramids you've seen, where the tier 1 is what we're providing to all students in terms of things to help with attendance. And then the students who struggle with what tier 1 students get, then tier 2, we get things like, mentoring and other programming, like absence intervention plan is kind of a tier 2, but that's a state required piece. But schools that see that they're having issues with particular student populations have and can have programming for students who need early intervention, where they've crossed that 10% threshold, all the way up to kind of becoming what we call severely chronically absent, which is that tier 3. That's there is more tier 3 intervention than just case management and court involvement. But what we also know is that we can't case manage ourselves out of attendance issues. And so what Attendance Works is reminding us is to actually go underneath this pyramid at the foundational supports you see at the bottom. And these foundational supports, as you can see, kind of undergird the rest of the work that the school is doing in terms of providing attendance supports for students. And so we're going to look at some of these foundational supports, but I just wanted you to see the context that it's in. And you can see the reminder of the pyramid in the upper right, that this is at the base. You will notice as I go through some of these that these are activities or pieces that you've either done, practiced, been trained on. Maybe schools that you're working with are doing this already, and that's great. And then if there are other things that maybe haven't been tried, these are some things that we wanted to give you some ideas to think about as you leave here about how someone in your role can affect attendance. And then after this session, or sorry, after this slide is when we'll go into our first breakout. So they break down their positive conditions for learning into 4 buckets. I'll start with the one on top, the physical and emotional health and safety. So the idea is that students who are struggling in a variety of ways, students who are dysregulated, cannot learn, right? Just like students who aren't in school can't learn, also, even if they're in the building, but they're having external and internal issues, they also cannot learn. So physical and emotional health and safety requires that that schools are looking at having healthy learning environments, that they're welcoming and safe, that students have access to basic needs, and even doing something like restorative circles. So this is a piece of a school. Yes, it is. And we work in the Office of Whole Child, so that is it. All comes back to that a lot of times. Thanks. The idea here is, what are you doing to build the school's culture and climate such that students feel safe, emotionally safe, psychologically safe? Because when we get into barriers for why students aren't coming to school, these are often things that end up coming up, which we'll talk about a little bit later. They also need to feel belonging, connection, and support. So having student and family engagement, that's a whole nother wing of our office. Having advisory time or meetings that help build community within a school or a small set of like a classroom setting. Having after school or before school activities, having positive peer connections. Students, just like adults, need to feel connected to their school community to feel a sense of belonging so that they want to go, right? And their parents need to have that same connection. We're finding more and more that what we're hearing, especially from older students who have, they were kind of, they saw this part of life where they saw the adults around them say, we can do school in a slightly different way because we have to, and that way is going to be from home. And so now as they've grown, they've said, well, I used to do school from home. Like if I don't go to school today, I'll just catch up and do my work from home and it's fine, or it's the same or whatever. And what we've seen is that as that is happening, parents are saying, sure, like stay home, you know, I'll call you off or whatever. So I say this because when we are in communication with families about not just expectations, but why is being in school helpful? Why is it good? It's like we have to re-explain these things since post-pandemic. And it's not just the supports, but it's also the programming that teachers are doing in school that students need access to. So communicating with families and students helps them be part of the school community, and that's a whole community kind of responsibility, not just the individual schools. Students also need to be academically challenged and engaged in what they're doing. That's another piece of this. And then also adult and student well-being. So we take this seriously too. And I mention it every time I'm in front of administrators. Yes, it's true that, you know, attendance gets worse in the springtime, right around spring break, before and after, and then toward the end of the school year, especially as like state testing is over, your teachers start checking out too, and the rest of your staff, and they need support too. So having an option for staff self-care is really important. Being trauma informed, having access to healthcare, mental health, having restorative check-ins. So Andrea is absolutely right. This is all whole child. It's also kind of, it's not just focused on the child, because you can see how adults, family engagement, staff are also part of this that's right, also part of this, these positive conditions for learning. So we're going to take our first breakout. I'll put it here in the chat so you can see it, not just see it. So we'll have one person start, just introduce yourself, and each person take, for this introduction part, just like 90 seconds or less, like who you are, where you work, you know, what you do, that kind of thing. And then you'll be in there for 8 to 10 minutes ish and discuss what information so far stood out to you, and then what are some ways that you could contribute to these positive conditions for learning. And then we come back, if we could have just one person just very briefly summarize some of the things you were talking about. Is that okay? All right, everyone's back. Exciting. All right. So we actually ended up with 3 groups, and it was just totally fine. And so whoever, you don't have names, so if someone wants to go first, again, just a really quick summary of what you talked about, and then if we've got some time, if we hear a lot of similar things, and I might address some of it before we move on to the next piece.
I guess I'll tee myself up.
Great.
For our group, I was with Tanya and Jackie and Michelle. And we really sort of settled in on this. First of all, chronic absence numbers are just astounding. One person on the call said that just today there were 63 kids out of the building. Like, wow. And it really also centered on, sort of parenting capacity. And so the need to grow skills for families to talk about school and why it's important and motivating kids. But two, how do schools really tout the excellent work they're doing in their building intentionally with families? So then families can message that back. Oftentimes, you got great innovative curriculums, great community partnerships. There's just a lot of really great energy and efforts happening, but we don't talk about that to our families. It's you will have a truancy filing if you don't attend this many days, and that's the message we get. Relationships obviously are central to this work. That includes relationships with families as well as relationship with peers, as a staff member, kiddo to kiddo relationships, and then the teacher to kiddos. But then there's a skill that has to happen in order to build and maintain those relationships. And yeah, I think that just really sort of centers in on, again, whole child. How do we do this work in collaboration as opposed to in isolation? And so when we can be really effective as a community partner, as a school, as a family, we're better together is really kind of how our work summed up our conversation.
Great. Thank you so much. Next group, either one.
Patrick, I'll go ahead and go. For my group, I was with Dawn, Ashley, Stephanie, and Logan. One of the takeaways we had was from what you shared was just the shock of how actually, chronic absenteeism increased last school year versus, we were expecting things to get better. I did share from a previous presentation I did, overall academically, with state test scores, we have seen an increase last school year statewide. I work specifically with English learners, and we saw an increase there, still well below pre-pandemic levels, but it's inching back. But also, if the chronic absenteeism is still this high, it makes sense why we're not seeing, huge gains back to where we were pre-pandemic. We really did talk too about that same thing, that whole human approach, that it's about the relationships, about multiple factors, but also how it impacts differently at different schools. High school graduation, Patrick, you mentioned about the need for, this predicts academic success, but if we're looking at graduation, you could basically almost look at their attendance history and understand if that student is going to be on track to graduate or not. But there's also successes out there. I mean, Dawn shared about one of her schools as a liaison. They had a 92% attendance rate for that group of students. So it was just like there's successes out there as well. And so I think that's the thing, we got to tap into that whole human piece, and then where we have successes, share what's working there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I do, before we get to the last group, I do just want to say we are hearing that from preliminary, just school only results, not what's getting reported to the state, which doesn't happen and cleaned up until the summertime. We are hearing that chronic absence, even in the more urban areas, is decreasing compared to last year. It's still high though. So you're right. We're seeing movement, but it's still not even close to pre-pandemic level. And we were expecting there to be some kind of correction with like society shifting a little bit and feeling a little bit more safe being around people, but there's still a lot of work to do for sure. And also the average daily attendance being in the 90s. Just one thing I want to note is that is something that schools have looked at for decades as a measure for how well your attendance is, but average daily attendance actually masks the problem of chronic absence, because the students who are missing, if there's a smaller number of students who are missing a lot of school, it's easy to miss that when you're looking at a majority of our students are attending school most of the time. So it's just something to think of. That's actually why chronic absence is the measure and not average daily attendance. Because unless you're in like the 90 higher than 95%, you likely still have a pretty bad chronic absence problem. They're not related to each other. They don't measure the same thing, but but one can mess the other. I just wanted to say that. Last group.
Well, we didn't really talk about who was going to talk, so I'll just go real quick. It's kind of the
Great.
same. But one of the things that was a highlight to me was one of the school districts is doing something in the high school called a wellness day, where they're addressing some of those needs of high school kids and kind of doing some things. So I thought that was very interesting. And another group had a writing group. So that was building relationships and how when kids feel a part of something they attend. So
Yeah.
so that's what we had.
Oh, good. Okay. Thank you, Don, for that clarification. That is good. Thank you, everyone. We're going to go back in your groups in a little bit to talk about some more things. And after this next piece, you might have some more thoughts or questions. So with that, let us look at some barriers. All right. So just like they have Attendance Works puts positive conditions for learning into 4 buckets, so too have they looked at reasons why folks don't attend school. And these can be student motivated or they can be parent motivated, but they put them into 4 buckets as well. So to start with just the barriers, this is where you'll find the 5th bullet down, housing and food insecurity as one barrier. Also trauma, family responsibilities at home, community violence, lack of access to technology, things that get in the way. These are the things that when your attendance people have absence intervention team meetings to create absence intervention plans, or just generally speaking, what can we do to remove barriers for students to coming to school? These are the things that folks look at. But they're not the only things that get in the way of students coming to school. There's also general aversion. So this is the things like anxiety, social and peer challenges, having an unwelcoming school climate, which is why the positive conditions for learning is so important, having undiagnosed disabilities or accommodations that aren't sufficient for the disability. When parents had negative experiences with school growing up, we hear that a lot. I hated school. I was bad at math. Therefore, my kid is bad at math or is, not going to school. That kind of language. There's also disengagement. So not being, this is why the other piece about being connected and feeling a sense of belonging is important. So students who feel bored or lack of challenging instruction, lack of culturally responsive instruction, not having relationships with adults, lack of opportunities for them, failure to earn credits, things like that. Being just disengaged from the school. And then there's also misconceptions. So that absences are only a problem if they're unexcused. The idea that missing 2 days per month doesn't affect learning. And that's missing 2 days per month is on average is what can lead a student. If you miss 2 days per month, you will be chronically absent for the school year. Losing track and underestimating your total absences, which is why we like to track all of them. Having sporadic absences, things like that. So one of the ways that we combat barriers is to, like I said, do some absence intervention planning to address those. But some of the ways to handle the other areas are different, which sometimes requires digging with the student or the family as to why the student isn't coming to school. And I think one of the things that we know happens is that students who are facing housing insecurity or any of these other barriers can lead to these other pieces, right? So that even if we step in and provide supports and get the student into a situation where they're able to come to school, they may still be experiencing aversion or disengagement that is now separate from the original barrier, but you're still the frontline person to help with that. So I think one of the questions I just wanted to put out to think about that you can talk about in your next breakout is how you see yourself impacting some of these different buckets when the students who are experiencing homelessness might face one or many of these pieces. So it's important to keep in mind, like, our approach to helping with each of these might be a little bit different, and it actually needs to be different depending on what's going on. So think about this. And then also one more piece just about communication in general is this idea that attendance is actually everybody's responsibility. It's a community-wide effort. So here are some folks who when I present to different groups, I'll say, these are all people who have an impact on attendance because of their relationship with students and their relationship with their role in the district. So obviously we have building administration as kind of the overseers of climate and culture, and also enforcement of policy. But a lot of these folks, counselors, social workers, nurses, I'm jumping a little bit in between here, like coaches, bus drivers, custodians, a lot of these folks may not think that attendance is their concern, but a lot of times they either have relationships with students, or students will tell them things that students won't tell other people. And so having a pulse on that is your role. Like that's part of what you do. And also your role in keeping the climate and culture going, whether it's making it a safe space, a clean space, a fun space. Like school needs to be all of those things, right? For feelings of belonging and safety, like physical safety, psychological safety. Your office staff are the people who talk, they're the front lines in terms of, fielding those phone calls. And I know that's one thing that I'm sure you have experienced as homeless liaisons, like how is your communication with the folks who take those calls in terms of what they do with the information that they get, or do they ask follow-up questions and things like that about, if basically, like, does your district have practices in place to say, when a student says, we I had to sleep at a friend's house last night, like, what's the follow-up to that conversation look like? Teachers, of course, and then also just the community at large. So think about too, just like we think about how you might have impact on those different buckets of aversion and misconception and disengagement and barriers. Also, how do we liaise with these folks at the district level when kind of dealing with those things? So those are kind of the two big buckets to talk about in this next breakout group, which you'll have again about 10-ish minutes, maybe a little bit longer, because it's more to say. That sound okay, Evelyn? We're good to go. We're all back. All right, everyone is back. All right, if you don't mind, just so we have a nice cadence, if you could go in the same order you did before. It doesn't have to be the same person, but those groups, if Andrea's group could go first, that would be great. Just share a little bit about what you talked about.
I guess I'll step up. I mean, again, I think we had a rich conversation, and I think I would sum it up in saying that it really requires us to move beyond checking the box. Yes, we understand the why, but then it's the relationship that's built that truly honors people and doesn't prescribe, deficit assumptions and perceptions, but really truly is understanding what could be happening underneath that's leading to this chronic absence issue, and really working with people, and thinking again about the whole human, and then linking to community partners, and thinking about the additional services in the building. We talked about a whole lot of stuff, and I was just in the moment, so forgive me for not synthesizing better. And I would welcome Jackie or Michelle or Tanya to jump on and add what I may have missed.
Right. Hearing none. Thank you for that. Jason's group.
I'll go. So my group really talked about the barriers. We talked about how we could eliminate those barriers. And just from my perspective, I think when I was talking about when I first started, I worked as a case manager and worked with homeless youth, kiddos, but I didn't really identify them as a McKinney-Vento. Wasn't familiar with that. So we talked a lot about just that whole piece of getting to know families and identifying the barriers and helping alleviate those. I gave some examples of things that I addressed initially when I first started. And we talked a little bit about some specific things that I did. For example, I created some resource folders that eliminated, barriers for people, specifically homeless, and if they were needed community resources, if they needed information on, housing, clothing, even legal issues. All of those things compiled really, I think, can increase attendance issues for families, especially like even just clothing items. And we've worked with, I was talking to my group about, we've worked with local partners who have, in fact, I have an office full of clothing right now and school supplies to really help just the very basic barriers that might cause attendance if a kiddo doesn't have clean clothes. I mean, I've literally known of families who don't have clean clothes to send their children to, and so they don't, or hygiene products because they're not clean, and that might be off-putting to other students. So just very, very basic things. And Dawn, if you want to jump on and talk about the transportation, we talked a little bit about transportation and getting, especially if kids reside out of school districts, we want to eliminate just those very basic barriers so that those things are out of the way. And then we can tackle the more complicated issues like lack of housing, lack of affordable housing, just taking those step by step to really reduce, those barriers so that we can increase their attendance. And I gave a story that I had heard about. It was a person with lived experience who's now a motivational speaker. And they said that, when they were experiencing homelessness, they had parents, unfortunately, who had substance abuse disorder. And it really affected their ability to, when they got off of school, they never knew where they were going to be. They didn't know if they were going to have food. They didn't know where their parents were going to be. But they said being in school created, they would have food, they had structure, they had access to mentors. And they knew every day that they were in school, that created stability for them. And that individual went on to be very successful in their life. So I think if we can get kiddos in school, even though they're experiencing these homelessness episodes, that creates such a stable environment for them. And I think that's really important. Just not just academics, but just that whole stability piece.
Yes. Anyone else from Stephanie's group want to add on to that?
I'll just add on just the Stephanie's idea about the folder, the accordion folder was amazing. But with the transportation too, just things that we run into, knowing that for me, it's very humbling, and you have to kind of take a step back, even if someone at a school tells you, well, we're not going to do that. to transport someone outside of the district to bring them where the kiddos go to school. And, you know, I told Jason and Stephanie, it's like I've had to step back and say, well, yes, you are, but just be, you know, empathetic to the ones at the school districts, because like I didn't know really anything about McKinney-Vento till I took this position, and coming from the outside of the school world. So I try to just have more patience with people and be understanding, and the kids still get transported. So very important to have patience.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Don. Right.
Miss Johnson, how are you? Okay.
I think great. Last group.
All right. I'll just go. Is that okay? All right. So we
Sure.
talked about the barriers for us are a little bit easier to handle. That we can get the food, we can do those kinds of things, except for transportation. That's been a nightmare this year. We don't have enough bus drivers, and we don't have enough. We can hardly do a regular routes, let alone do extra routes. So that's been a nightmare. But what we talked about is the emotional and the mental, those kind of the aversion and the disengagement are harder for us to work through. And it really is about building those relationships and doing those things. We've had, in my particular district, we've had people that we would like to be mentors and help these students, and they have lived experiences and they have some things that would be relatable to the students, but yet they're not allowed to be mentors because they can't pass background checks. Let's see, we talked about, let's see, about, I forget what else. We talked a little bit about how we, and this is a personal thing for me, is how I wish we could get a one free pass for some students who have experienced homelessness in their life with the Ohio High School Athletic Association, so we could get them on a team and get them part of something to make them feel like they're involved, you know, because it's just so hard to get and keep them eligible. And that's one non-negotiable. They have to be eligible, but it's really hard to get that so that they can, you know, stay on the team. And if we could just like have a little bit more wiggle room with some of the kids that have experienced all this, because they can't see to next quarter. So it's hard, or coaches would just allow them to participate and kind of keep them on a team, maybe not whatever, but just let them be part of a group, because that would help engagement a lot.
What, Amy, if you don't mind, what changes their eligibility? Is it grades, or is it
Grades,
something else?
yeah, grades. They have to have the grades. And a lot of times they're grading on attendance, and there's different things. And if they don't, you know, and then you know, there's always that showing up for practice or this or that. I mean, I've had some student athletes that are homeless, so I'm not saying that I've never had, but there are some that I think if we could just, because it's then the path that they choose and what they start to do. And it's just, I guess that maybe I've been doing it long enough. I've seen some of the ramifications. So
yeah. Okay. Thank you, groups, for sharing what you did. I want to just move on to my last slide so that you have my information if you don't already, just to show that if you have questions about attendance for an individual student, or if your district or building principal has questions about their policy or how it's affecting students who are on your caseload, I have a phone number, I have an email address. I answer questions all the time. This is most of what I do. So I'm happy to be available in that regard. But I wanted to see just now that we've kind of talked through everything, if anybody has any outstanding questions for each other or the group for the last few minutes here. Well, there's a
Yeah, so
feedback survey.
Patrick, I would just like to thank you for your expertise. I think this was a really rich opportunity to engage in these discussions about attendance. We know our students experiencing homelessness have such difficulties getting to school consistently. So one of the things that I pulled out of Patrick's presentation was the attendance the previous year can predict the students' attendance in the current school year. So I would just encourage, if as much as you can get involved in looking at that data this summer and getting on the proactive side of how can we support these students. And yeah, I would encourage that. We really know that the attendance officers are challenged. Their capacity is limited, as well as all the homeless liaisons out there. But working together, we can make such a difference. So yeah, any other comments or thoughts about what action step you may take as a result of this? We'd love to hear it. If not, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Patrick. This was great. Thank you, all of you, for all the work that you do every day. We see you. Thank you.
Okay. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.